Welcome back. Now we will look at lecture 4, and in lecture 4 we will talk about the gestural theory of language evolution. Gestural theory, it talks about gestures being a precursor to language evolution. However, gestural theory itself has its antecedents in somewhat in the glottogenetic thought. Now, what is glottogenetic thought? This idea takes us to the naturalistic concept of the evolution of language. Naturally, what would have happened? What is the if you are left without any human interaction, how will you learn language? That was the question of behind the glottogenetic thought. Now, this idea was taken up in a major way in the 15th and 16th century. The time that was that is called the age of discovery. Now, this was the time. Age of discovery is an euphemism for the time of colonialism. That is when the western powers, various western explorers went around to the rest of the world and then found new people, new languages, new communities, and so on and so forth. This finding, this discovery gave rise to a lot of interesting, theoretically interesting questions in the intelligentsia among the scholars. One of the questions that was asked was that how did the wild man become civilized? How did the wild man become gain the features of humanity? Now, where does this idea of wild man come from? When they came across, when they went to Africa, for example, the locals were looked upon as some sort of an animal. So, they were not considered part of the human race, they were considered part of the orangutan. So, orangutan was a term used for apes at that time. This was not a specific animal, it was the class of apes. So, they were considered, humans were part of that community, and because they differed so significantly from the westerners, it was understood that they are they are called savage, they have been called by various names. So, the people they came across were not sufficiently human. For one, they did not share the religion, they did not share other kind of social practices, and so on and so forth. So, that kind of gave rise to a lot of questions with respect to how humans became more sophisticated, more civilized. One of the answers that came about was language. Language is one of the things that was part of the civilizing process. So, there are many scholars from that time. Herder is one of the biggest name of that time that talks about these things. Anyway, so in this backdrop, one of the person who we will be talking about is of Giordano Bruno. He is considered among the first who popularized the naturalistic idea, point to a pre-Adamic origin of language. Meaning, let me just explain little bit about what is this idea of pre-Adamic language. In the western countries, the people, the colonizers who went out to find the new world were Christian. Now, in the Christian belief system, the language was given to Adam by God. Now, the people they encountered now in the 15th and 16th century, the new world, they had not heard about Christianity, they were not Christians. So, that means the Adamic origin of language does not hold here, which means language existed. So, the idea of languages predating Adam is what we are talking about here. So, pre-Adamic language is the possibility that language was available, language was possible before Adam, that is the idea. So, Giordano Bruno is one of the first one who popularized this idea that the origin of language could be pre-Adamic. And similarly, this idea was it was not new during Bruno's time. This idea was there since the ancient times. In ancient Greece, Epicurus was one of the first ones to talk about this, and he said that he argued for a natural expression for emotion as the route to acquire language. Language evolved as a out of different kinds of onomatopoeic words. So, first it was an expression and which came out as an outburst of emotion, and which later on through processes became what we know as language today. Similarly, we have Lucretius in his poem, he develops the idea and refers to the origin of language as gesture by a child who does not know how to speak yet. This was the idea. So, going back all the way to the Greeks and then till the time of the 15th and 16th century, and then around the same time, a number of Catholic priests also and scholars also in the 1600s favored the Epicurean idea of the language developing out of gestures. So, this was not a divine origin, but it was a natural origin that was gaining popularity around that time. We have talked about Vico already, Giambattista Vico. He was a well known scholar in the Epicurean tradition. His theory of language evolution was based on analogy and iconicity. The early communication according to him was not vocal, but it was gestural. So, out of gestures and various kinds of expressions, language evolved according to him. So, in his book The New Science, he argued that the 3 stages of development which mark the epochs of God, heroes and people determine the general development of humanity, the development of individual communities as well as the child development. It is very his take is rather interesting, where he talks about different epochs which you can take as epochs in the evolution of humans as well as in the evolution of child development as well. So, the first stage, second stage and third stage are sort of equivalent between the child's development and the human's development as a race. This is something we talked about in the beginning. So, in the development of the first phase corresponding to the age of gods, children primarily try to understand the surrounding creatures and objects with the help of perceptual attributes. In the second stage, which is called the phase of the heroic phase, children identify with heroes of the cultures in which they are raised. Right, and with the power of fantasy they create innumerable imagined situations and roles, and in the end the transition from childhood to adulthood is connected with the acquisition of abstract thinking, which marks the entry into the age of the people. This is something which later on was built up by Jean Piaget as well, the various stages of human child development, which kind of corresponds to some extent with this idea. Another important name is that of Lord Monmouth. He was a Scottish judge and was considered eccentric by many. He wrote a 6-volume book called The Origin and Processes of Language in 1774. Here he also gives an account of naturalistic account of origin of human as well as language. He also uses the term orangutan. He opined that humans originated from apes. He basically said from the orangutans, and he argued that the original language consisted of monosyllabic words in the imperative mood, basically meaning there was no syntax, monosyllabic simple vocalizations, that too in the imperative mode. For his thesis, he drew example from a large number of non-European languages, and he actually gives a very interesting comparative study between among all of these languages, and because of which he is also considered as the father of philology. And he attributed probably for the first time various skills such as socialization and knowledge of rudimentary technology to these apes, although they lacked language. This is also something that we today know. The roots of this was shown that time 1700s, that the higher primates do have a lot of skills. Today of course, we take it as for granted. Then comes Mandeville. This is another person who is in the same tradition and attributed to the social natural emergence of language theory. Now, while Monod talked about orangutans as the source of the of language, their monosyllabic vocalizations are the source of language. He also considered the feral children as some sort of a link between the apes and the humans of today. On the other hand, Mandeville talks about the early human language to be developed from the gestures, much like Giambattista Vico said. So, this is the slight difference between him and Monboddo. Mandeville in his famous poem The Fable of the Bee suggests that children would use gesture as this is the most natural and expressive form of communication, which is not very difficult to understand. You can see small children before they start vocalizing, they do use a lot of gestures like pointing and so on. So, many consider him as the original scholar to to propose the gestural origin of human language. However, more people know about Condillac than they know about Mandeville. So, majority of scholars do attribute the origin of the gestural thesis to Condillac. So, Condillac is his timing is 1715 to 1780. His work is Essay on the Origin of Human Knowledge, which was published somewhere around 1746. It was widely influential during the Enlightenment in Europe, not only because of the content of his work, but also because he himself was a very influential man at that time within the among the elites. So, he proposed the same thought experiment that two children, a girl and a boy, find themselves in the wilderness and live in seclusion before they gain knowledge of any language. He then asks whether they will discover a language themselves, and if so, what it will be and how it will develop among the couple's descendants. The same kind of thought experiments that we have seen many people doing before him, that if you leave a child outside of the human influence and with no human contact, what will the child do? What kind of language will it develop and how? This is the same idea that he talks about, and he kind of agrees on the point that the children will begin to communicate with each other using natural language consisting of emotional cries accompanied by the movement of the entire body. This is similar to what Vico also said, that you will have gestures and some sort of an expression of emotion, spontaneous expression of emotion. This combination of gesture with pantomime would eventually get conventionalized, accelerating the communication. Conventionalized means that initially they will be arbitrary. Over a period of time, each signal, each sign will mean something. So, this will become a word of some sort. So, from this stage to the vocal language would take a long time, mainly due to the stiffness of the tongue. That is how he put it. So, the gestures will develop into conventionalized structure, which in turn after a very long time will turn into vocal language, and which according to him will take time because of the stiffness of tongue. Successive generation of children would have contributed to this development due to the elasticity of their articulatory organs. These are the precursors to the gestural hypothesis that was put forward much later. They themselves form a group which is called the glottogenetic thought. Now, we come to the modern day. According to the gestural hypothesis, the primary idea is that language phylogenetically originated from gestures. So, gestures came first and this was followed by language, and this theory has been juxtaposed to the vocal auditory hypothesis, that is according to which the language of origin of language can be traced to non-linguistic vocalizations, some sort of sounds vocalizations, and which in turn became language. So, these are the two important theories which are juxtaposed to each other. Let us focus on gestural theory for now. This theory of course has antecedents, as we just saw. In the modern times, these are the names that are most commonly associated with gestural theory. Most importantly are Hewes, Arbib and Michael Corbelis. Now, there are variations within the theory itself, not everybody says the same thing, but just as we saw in the biological marker theories, there are Salterson's view as well. There are some amount of similarity and some amount of dissimilarity, but because they all agree that gestures predates language, hence we all put them together under the same category. Now, variations, these are some of the variations. There are more minor variations as well, but these are the most important ones. Gestural hypothesis has primarily two types of stands. One is the gestural proto-language hypothesis. Now, this hypothesis assumes that proto-linguistic communication before vocal language emerged had relied mainly on gestures functioning on as isolated signs devoid of syntax. So, there was no syntax, just like monkey gestures by other kinds of animals or higher primates, where gestures stand for one, let us say a lexical entity. There is no syntax, so to say. That is what the idea says. Gestures stand for words and represent their reference. Hewes and Arbib are the most important scholars in this line. Next comes gesture before speech hypothesis. This assumes that gestural language emerged before spoken one and highlights that its function was limited to transmission of non-verbal information such as emotion. Now, there is a third variation which is called the gesture and speech hypothesis. This focuses on the close link between speech and gesture in the course of a linguistic expression. They assume that language development always engaged both the modalities, the vocal and the visual. So, these are the three primary differences within the gestural hypothesis of evolution of language. Now, let us look at a couple of them, the most important one of them. So, here we will talk about first. The modern hypothesis regarding gestural theory was formulated by American anthropologist Hewes. His very popular, very well known important paper which is called Primate Communication and the Gestural Origin of Language, synthesized data from a diverse number of fields and argued for gestural hypothesis. Around that time when his theory came out, we already had some amount of studies carried out on the higher primates and how they could be taught various kinds of sign language and so on and so forth. So, he collected all the data and put them together, synthesized them, and on the basis of which he came out with this theory. The main argument of him came from the finding that apes could be taught a variation of sign language, but they could not be taught human vocal language. That was one of the primary basis for his theory. Hominins, whose cognitive abilities must have been much like those of modern non-human apes, were capable of creating a gestural proto-language. That was his conclusion on the basis of his observation that apes could be taught sign language. So, if modern apes can use sign language, in some sense we can think of them as a precursor to modern humans doing the same things. So, as a result, because apes cannot be taught to speak, we also were like them, we also used gestures. That was the idea. Secondly, their vocalizations are involuntary emotional reactions and used even when there is no one around there to listen, which means this is not a targeted sort of a communication system. It is not a communication system, it is just an outburst, just an expression of emotion of some sort. This is the idea. So, this is not utilized primarily for communication as the goal. These are the most important ideas that he put forward, and he also states that gestures have not been completely replaced by language, as gestures are part of our communication even today. All of us are, in fact, there is an entire subdiscipline looking at gestures and their their importance in communication system, cross cultural differences in gestures that we typically see accompanying speech and so on. So, gestures have not gone away completely, they still exist, and different aspects of modern culture are rooted in gesture like painting and vocal communication as well. So, there is for example, poetry and so on. Later in his later publications provided a solution for the modality transition. What do we mean by modality transition? Because he talks about gestures predating vocal language, there must have been a transition from gestures to vocal language. How do you take care of it? His earlier publication, his original paper does not give a very good explanation for that, but his 1996 paper, in his later paper, he talks about some sort of he tries to give some sort of an explanation where he talks about mouth gestures and sound symbolism coming together to make the transition possible. However, this process is also not very clear even in his theory. How does that happen? That is not very clear. Another big name in this domain is that of Michael Corballis. He kind of he developed on Hewes' idea in the later times, subsequent times. His key point was that the skilled motor movements and language are typically both supported by the Broca's area. He bases his arguments on the mostly on neurological findings, that both motor movements and language are some sort of they are housed in the Broca's area. Broca's area is responsible for both gesture and speech, hence there has to be a connection, that is the idea. He finds brain basis for connecting gestures with vocal language as a result of this, and even today brain imaging studies reveal a close connection with motor movement and speaking in humans. As I have just said that Broca's area, lesion in the Broca's area impairs your speech production. You cannot, the articulatory system gets affected. So, this is what he also said, that in case Broca's area is responsible for both gesture. So, we have a brain basis to support our hypothesis that gestures predated human language. So, in non-human primates, this area is of course used for complex gestures. Another area, another finding from neurosciences that he utilized was the discovery of mirror neuron. Now, what is mirror neuron? Mirror neurons are those neurons that get activated when one is doing an action or is watching others doing the same action. So, for example, somebody playing football, the kind of or a simpler job like writing on the board, and you are looking at somebody else doing the same thing, the same kind of neurons will get activated. That is called they are the mirror neurons. So, these neurons are there across the brain, they are spread across the brain, but most notably they are seen in Broca's area 44 and 45. So, hence these neurons would have provided early speakers the feedback they needed about others' intentions and perspectives. Now, what this last point means is that because mirror neurons gets activated when you see somebody else doing the action, this means that you kind of are able to be in their mental shoes. That is why we see when the people getting emotional about a dropped catch or a missed run or a run out or something, because you are imagining yourself there. Your mirror neuron is helping you feel that. Right. So, this is what he actually said, that because mirror neuron has this particular function, this would have in the prime case of our ancestors given some sort of a feedback about how this works. So, this was necessary. So, mirror neurons is another domain of proof as far as Corvallis goes. Another important parallel that he points out is that of sign language, which is complex, as complex as the vocal auditory loop language. So, this is another proof according to him. He however, does not say that gestures turned into language, unlike his predecessors who said that gestures came first and then language happened, gestures converted to language. He does not say that. He says that both of them, he considers speaking as another kind of gesture, which is a facial one. So, something like similar to what Hewes also had said about mouth gestures. So, Corvallis says the same kind of thing, facial gesture, and he also takes help from motor theory of speech perception, which was given by Lieberman. Our understanding of language is derived from how words are produced rather than about the sound itself. So, when I understand somebody, when I am able to figure out the sounds, it is not because how they sound, but how they are produced, what happened behind the scene to produce that sound, and this is the motor theory of speech perception given by Lieberman. So, the same theory also is used by Corvallis to in support of his theory about gesture preceding language. So, the gradual transition from manual gestures to increasing use of gestures of the face and mouth could also have co-occurred with the increasing involvement of the hands in tool making. So, there is he brings in a large number of different kinds of probable inputs into this into the evolution of language. Around the same time, according to him, humans started also making tools. And his theory has been supported by many others also, that when we started to create tools is when finer cognitive abilities started to appear among humans. So, this is when large number of gestures shifted from the hands to the face probably and the mouth, that is the idea. Researchers have also used studies from the field of developmental psychology to support the gestural theory. Infants typically learn to express the concepts first through gestures like pointing at a toy or something, before they start to express them with spoken words. Then comes Philip Lieberman. His book If Spoke came out in 1998. His primary focus is on the neural basis of language evolution. According to him, language does not only serve the purpose of communication, but it is also a part of thought. This is not just one of thing, that is not just a tool for communication, but it is part of the thought process itself. The reason is that language is inextricably connected to motor control, attention and other aspects of human behavior. So, he is one of the most important theoreticians in this domain. He says the chimpanzees have latent linguistic abilities. Neanderthals and other archaic humans also possess some sort of language abilities. Similar parallel can be found in found for all human behavior. So, the same neural structure exists among many other animals, whether it is our close cousins or higher primates or other animals. So, just having the neural structure is not enough, which means that neural structure does not mean having the same kind of function. So, you can have different kinds of functions from the same neural structure. This is the primary thesis. So, neural structures that date back to species that lived millions of years ago and served other ends have been recycled to regulate speech. The primary focal point of Lieberman's theory is that neural structures evolved over time. Neural structures have been repurposed for different kinds of activities and different kinds of functions. So, the same neural structure that had a different function in another animal millions of years ago have been repurposed for humans to speak. That is the baseline idea. And his theory is based on the argument that existing neural structures were repurposed. For example, he gives many examples. For the cerebellum and the hippocampus are archaic structures and today they play a role in cognition. They existed since time immemorial. Other examples that he gives is the subcortical basal ganglia that appear in early anurans, the tailless amphibians. This goes back all the way to that time, but the same structure has a different purpose in case of today's humans. This regulates motor control including speech, not just speech, but many other motor controls. Similarly, this supports neural circuits linking prefrontal cortex, posterior cortical regions and other subcortical structures. These circuits are active in linguistic task and as lexical access, comprehending distinction in meaning conferred by syntax and the range of higher cognitive tasks including executive control. The basal ganglia play a critical role in conferring cognitive flexibility. So, these structures go back to all the way to the tailless amphibians, but in humans the functions are like this. Also, the cingulate cortex were found in the therapsids, which are archaic mammal ancestors. They were the transitional mammal like reptiles. That is how old the structure is. This cortical part were and still are involved in mammalian mother infant interactions. It also controls laryngeal phonation. It is active in directive attention, in cognitive tasks, so on and so forth. So, the idea that basic idea that he gives out is this, that these same kind of neural structures can be traced back millions of years ago, but today the same structures we also carry, humans carry, but with a different kind of function. So, as a result of which he has contributed largely on to the debate about natural selection and abrupt changes. He turns to Darwin for support for his theory. Darwin stressed for gradual nature of the natural selection. However, he also knew that there were abrupt changes during evolution, like change from aquatic to terrestrial life. Even though Darwin says that there is natural selection which works rather slowly through evolution, but he does say that there are stages from the aquatic to the reptile, to the amphibian, to the mammals, and those kind of stages also Darwin has proposed. So, as a result of which Philipp Lieberman also goes back to that idea, and his solution for this type of evolution was recycling, adapting an organ for a new purpose which takes care of this kind of a process. And current studies also confirm this, that recycling is a general process, and this includes the cerebellum and the basal ganglia, which Lieberman talks about heavily, which initially appeared to have been adapted for motor tasks, functioning in cognitive tasks, and also it includes language. So, this is how the this is how Philipp Lieberman proposes his idea. Primary thesis being that the neurobiological structures that are there in humans also were there among other animals. They have just been repurposed. right. He strongly disagrees with Chomsky as well, that language suddenly appeared, because remember Chomsky said that language initially he says 50,000, later on he readjusted to 200,000, but whatever the timeline be, it appeared suddenly. And how did it appear? There is a single computation called merge, which is part of his SMT theory, that this operation yields the defining characteristic of all human languages, which is basically according to Chomsky, which is complex sentences with embedded clauses. Now, this is how it came, and this system accounts for the acquisition of language by children, and its sudden evolution takes exactly two syntactic elements and puts them together. This is how Chomsky's idea of language evolution worked, which Lieberman severely criticized. Because he says this makes no sense, because different languages put two different things together. Chomsky's initial theory was primarily based on English language. So, in that case it would be the two items could be determiner and the noun, but in not all languages work like that. Chinese does not use a determiner. So, which means the variation across the world's languages, taking care of all the typical feature of that language, have to be genetically encoded, and that variation to be encoded in the human gene through a mutation at the same time, all of a sudden is kind of a far-fetched idea according to Philip Lieberman. So, this whole idea, as a result of which Lieberman calls that it belongs to the realm of fantasy. So, you see how back and forth we are going between the various kinds of theorists, various scholars with respect to the various kinds of biological markers and how they have been debating on the same thing. So, he concludes that human language evolution is a natural selection acting on heritable biological variation. Biological variations came first, and then that was inherited, and that is how gradually this happened. Natural selection worked on that, acted upon that, and then that is how language came into being. Natural selection acting on genetic and epigenetic events in the last 500,000 years enhanced human capacities. So, it is not only genetics, but also epigenetics. What is epigenetics? Epigenetics is the environment in which we find ourselves. There is an idea called ecological brain. So, the environment within which the child develops, the environment means both the natural and the cultural environment. So, depending on that, over a period of time, certain kinds of traits become your genetic trait or your inherent trait. One good example for this is the lactose tolerance versus lactose intolerance. So, nowadays we find lot of people who are lactose intolerant. Now, according to the theories of both Lieberman and others, the idea that most people, many humans across the world are tolerant of lactose means that sometime during the evolutionary stages, humans domesticated cattle, they domesticated cows, the goat and other sheep and so on, as a result of which the food practice, the dietary practices changed, and this change in the food practice over a period of time became kind of coded genetically into tolerance, lactose tolerance. On the other hand, you have people who probably did not go through this. So, as a result of which you can deduce that this did not become part of their genetic inheritance. So, those people probably who lived in communities where milk was not part of the dietary practices. So, as a result of which there are people who are lactose intolerant. So, these kind of epigenetic factors combined with the genetic underpinnings is how human evolution happened according to Lieberman. So, disease susceptibility is one of the examples that he gives. So, this is where we complete our lecture 4. In the lecture 5, we will take up on the other theories, both cultural theory of language evolution as well as we will look at the theories about vocal theory of language evolution. Thank you.